Unit 1, Module 3. In this module, we'll continue exploring the pillars of my design philosophy by digging into the second of the three I's, the concept of invention. We'll discuss what invention means in terms of level design and how to approach including it in your own work. To review, in the last module we discussed intention and its importance to good design. We also started to explore the idea of common level themes. Our quote this time comes from the American toymaker Roger von Wake. Wake says, "Necessity may be the mother of invention, but play is certainly the father." As we will learn in this module, to create something truly special, we need to approach problem solving in unexpected, creative ways. We have to be willing to play with our own preconceived ideas so that new, unexpected solutions present themselves in our work. The best levels feature what I like to call invention on the part of the level designer. They have elements that make them truly stand out in the mind of the player, something that makes them sparkle. For example, they might have a particularly fun gameplay setup, or perhaps some truly inspired placement of visual details, or hidden secrets to reward patient, careful players. The very best examples of invention enrich the player's experience in unexpected ways, and can lead to moments that a player will never forget. To explain this concept, I'm going to offer an example from my own experience as a player. I realize that this dates me, but the game I want to reference is Gargoyle's Quest from the original Game Boy handheld gaming system. Gargoyle's Quest was a terrific platform action game that featured a gargoyle hero named Firebrand. The dramatic context for Firebrand's adventure was a quest to travel through the mythical landscape of the Ghoul Realm, to transform himself into the legendary Red Blaze and save the realm from an approaching army of evil destroyers. Gargoyle's Quest featured some unique gameplay mechanics for a platform-type game. Firebrand could jump and cling to walls, making it possible to move upwards through a level as well as sideways. He could also glide, using his tiny wings, so the player could jump and then glide a good distance to safety. Finally, Firebrand had fiery breath, so the action of the game centered around jumping, climbing, and gliding puzzles, as well as blasting enemies and obstacles. Gargoyle's Quest had a campaign map that showed the countryside from a view high overhead. During their quest, the player could wander around on the map and use it to select levels that they would then enter and play. Each of the levels featured an end boss, a super big bad guy that required special strategies to defeat. And it was the level design leading up to the boss at the end of the game that used a trick of invention that cemented it in my memory forever. The final boss was named Breger, king of the evil destroyer army, and he lived at the top of an incredibly high tower. You could tell it was high because it was much taller than anything else on the campaign map. After completing every other level in the game, I finally entered Bregers Tower to confront him. The level started out with a bit of horizontal travel, and then promptly turned almost entirely to long spaces of vertical traversal. As a player, I remember going up and up and up and thinking, wow, this tower really is tall. And then the level designer blew my mind. The level reached an obvious hole in the wall of the tower, and there was no way to proceed upwards on the interior. So I ventured outside through the hole. And as I walked out the hole, the level designer swapped the background texture of the level, which up to that point had been a kind of cobblestone wall-looking thing, with the super high aerial view of the campaign map. It was terrifying. Even though I was on a tiny black and white handheld screen, I felt like suddenly I was miles up in the sky, clinging to the side of a crumbling tower, and I still had to climb even higher to confront Breger himself. It was a simple technical trick, just replacing one 2D image for another. But to me, as a player, it created the delightful illusion of great height and made the experience of that level stick in my memory forever. That is the power of invention, reinforcing the intention of the design. Often a level designer will need to do some extra work to bring their moments of invention to life, but the end user can feel the difference in quality that the extra time and effort make on the game. While I was working at Bungie, one of my jobs was lead design on a PC action game called Oni. Oni was a third-person action game that featured shooting and hand-to-hand combat. The core mechanics of the game were fun, but our production resources were limited, so there wasn't a lot to do in the game besides shoot and fight. One level designer, named Mike, wanted to add more gameplay to his levels. We talked about solutions as a team, but we couldn't spare extra time for programming or art to add any kind of new game mechanics. So Mike got creative. He took a system that we already had, power-ups and guns, and started to hide them in his levels in places that were difficult for the player to get to. We started calling the hidden power-ups Mike Goodies. I was worried that all the extra power-ups might ruin the balance of the game, but our playtesters loved them. They liked the challenge of finding them, and they were very pleased when the hidden items made the fights in the levels easier. While the battles got a little bit shorter, the amount of time that players were spending playing the game went up, as they spent extra time jumping around, trying to find and capture every last Mike Goodie. So we kept them in the game. In fact, I asked Mike to make sure that there were goodies in every level. It took him some work to add his concept to every space in the game, but it was well worth the extra effort. The takeaway here is that even with limited resources, a level designer can find inventive ways to make his levels more fun, more interesting, and more memorable. In the best cases, examples of invention in level design bring unexpected depth and richness to the game as a whole. Game development is a collaborative art form, and when the other members of the game development team see invention in action, they'll often rush to help or refine and extend those flashes of inspiration. A terrific example of this is the Space Marines that accompanied the player in the Halo series of games. As you'll see, invention on the part of the level designer led to changes in the entire game and in the entire Halo franchise. As we were working on the first Halo game, the dramatic context of the levels called for the player to meet groups of Marines that were stranded on the surface of the Halo space ring. But at the time, there were no systems for making the Marines react to the player. The player might drive up to a group of soldiers in a Warthog Jeep that could carry up to 3 people, but the Marines would simply mill around nearby, just like they're doing in this picture, ignoring him. One level designer, named Paul, thought it would be really cool if the Marines would jump in the Warthog to ride along and help the player in the level. So he started creating level scripts to force the Marines to ride along. But Paul quickly discovered that once the Marines got in the Jeep, he then also have to have them explicitly get back out whenever the player stopped driving, and then get back in after whatever gunfight that they were participating in was over and it was time to leave the area. And he had to try and do that for every encounter in the level. Making Marines act that way, and the way that they should act based on player expectation, was turning into a staggering amount of work. Paul spent a lot of late nights creating and refining the level scripting to support the behavior of the Marines in all the levels that he was working on. But the results of his work paid off handsomely. When the Halo team began to playtest his levels, everybody was so impressed by the behavior of the Marines that they wanted to help refine the feature. The AI programmer offered to help automate some of the work so that the level designers didn't have to always move the Marines by hand. And the audio director on the project had the idea of giving the Marines nearby a few lines, so they weren't just silent companions. Well, the results were amazing. Supporting Marines became a staple in the Halo levels, and there were few things more satisfying than rolling out to kick some alien butt with a full complement of buddies in tow. If you're familiar with the Halo series of games, you probably know that in Halo 2, the Marines graduated from mere bystanders and passengers into full fighting partners, able to drive the vehicles for you on missions and even fire the onboard weapons. And their dialogue got a lot more sophisticated. In later games in the series, the Marines make comments based on the action that's happening around them. There's probably no better feeling as a player than to pull off a spectacular headshot on an alien enemy, have Sergeant Johnson say, "Nice shot." I can hear some skeptics saying, but what if I'm working on a project where invention is impossible? And the answer is that there's no such thing. I believe that invention is always possible. Even when you're restricted in the enemies or mechanics that you're allowed to place, you still have full creative control over the setups that you're making. Say you're making a Mario game, and you're only allowed to use basic Goombas. Then your challenge would be to think of as many surprising, interesting, or fresh encounters using Goombas as you could. With only limited mechanics, you could probably come up with a near infinite variety of setups, which is why Goombas continue to show up in the Mario games to this very day. The basic recipe of Goombas and jumping yields as many different and new setups as there are level designers on the series. In this module, we learned about invention in level design and the impact that it can have on making games. We learned that invention can bring even the smallest moments to life in a game and make them memorable. And we learned that invention can transform not just a level, but an entire franchise by delivering on the intentions of the designers and on the desires of the player. And finally, we learned that invention requires effort, sometimes extraordinary effort on the part of the level designer, to make something that's not just good, but great. As a level designer, you must always challenge yourself. Always strive to make your work better and more memorable. See you in Module 4.